The sterile hum of Sterling Dynamics' 50th floor, usually a muffled backdrop to the city's early morning rhythm, was punctuated by a sound so out of place it felt like a physical shock, a soft, broken whimper, almost swallowed by the vast, polished silence. It wasn't the aggressive clang of the cleaning crew's cart, nor the sharp click of early bird heels on marble. This was raw, vulnerable, intensely human. Ethan Hayes, disguised as Ed Johnson in a faded Boston Red Sox baseball cap and a gray blazer slung over a plain t-shirt, had just stepped off the executive elevator. He'd deliberately chosen this ungodly hour to retrieve some personal items from his true corner office, a space he'd meticulously avoided for 6 weeks to preserve his undercover persona. The door, typically secured with an advanced biometric lock, was ajar, a sliver of unexpected light spilling into the dim hallway. A feeling of unease, sharp and immediate, pricked at him. He pushed the door inward, his breath catching in his throat. The room, a monument to corporate power with its sprawling glass walls and minimalist design, was not empty. Huddled on the plush, deep pile carpet near his untouched mahogany desk, a child no older than 8 was weeping. His small body shook with silent, desperate sobs, his face buried in his hands. The uniform, a crisp navy blue vest over a white button-down shirt, was smudged with dirt, and a gaping tear in the sleeve revealed a faint, discolored bruise peeking through. A splash of bright, defiant red from his tie seemed to mock the pallor of his tear-streaked face. His blonde hair, usually neat, was disheveled, clinging to his damp forehead. The sight was a brutal, physical blow to Ethan. All the carefully constructed layers of his Ed Johnson detachment, built over 6 weeks of observing corporate machinations with a dispassionate eye, shattered in that instant. The boy, Leo, Marco Rodriguez's son, the quiet night custodian. Ethan recognized him from fleeting glimpses in the hallways, a ghost of a child moving through the sterile grandeur. The innocent, gut-wrenching despair of the boy was a stark, screaming contrast to the silent, gleaming indifference of the office. Another man, standing rigidly behind the reception desk in the background, a crisp white shirt and dark tie, an unyielding uniform against the muted office walls, merely watched. His arms were crossed, his expression unreadable, a silent sentinel of the corporate world's detached observation. But for Ethan, there was no detachment, only a primal, overwhelming urge to alleviate the crushing sorrow emanating from the small figure. He knelt, slowly, his voice dropping to a gentle murmur, a tone rarely heard by anyone in the fiercely competitive corridors of Sterling Dynamics. "Hey there, little man," he whispered, his own throat unexpectedly tight. "What's wrong?" Leo, startled by the voice, lifted his head. His eyes, a startling blue, were swollen, bloodshot and raw, 2 glistening tracks carving paths through the grime on his cheeks. A fresh tear spilled, catching the fluorescent light, an undeniable testament to his profound distress. He tried instinctively to scrub away the evidence of his vulnerability with the back of his hand, a futile gesture that only smeared the dirt further. But the vulnerability was already laid bare, a shattering indictment of a system Ethan was only just beginning to truly understand. If you've ever felt that soul-crushing wave of helplessness when you see someone truly suffering, especially a child, then you know this pain. Leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe if you want to follow stories that remind us of our shared humanity. But to understand how such raw despair could find itself in the gilded cage of Sterling Dynamics, we must first rewind, back to the meticulous planning of a corporate titan, and the quiet, unnoticed struggles of those who kept his empire gleaming. 6 weeks earlier, Ethan Hayes had embarked on a mission born of frustration and a gnawing sense of disconnect. His board, a collection of seasoned financiers and innovation evangelists, had voiced concerns. Sterling Dynamics, once a beacon of cutting-edge financial strategy in downtown Chicago, was stagnating. Innovation, they claimed, was stifled. Employee morale, though rarely discussed in boardrooms, was subtly eroding beneath a veneer of corporate professionalism. Ethan, a man whose life had been a meticulously choreographed ascent to the pinnacle of corporate power, decided on a radical approach: go undercover. He shared the bespoke suits, the polished loafers, the carefully cultivated aura of inaccessible authority. He became Ed Johnson, a newly hired analyst in corporate strategy, a ghost in the machine designed to observe, to listen, to uncover the hidden inefficiencies and cultural misalignments that were purportedly choking the company's potential. He wore nondescript chinos, worn polo shirts, and a baseball cap pulled low, blending into the vast anonymity of mid-level management. His private office, his sanctuary atop the 50th floor, became a forbidden zone, a symbol of the very detachment he was trying to dismantle. He told colleagues he preferred the open-plan cubicle farm, a plausible excuse for a down-to-earth analyst. His initial weeks were a whirlwind of data, meetings, and casual observations. He saw the cold efficiency of processes, the relentless pursuit of profit margins, the subtle power plays in the executive suites. He noted the pervasive sense of individual silos, the guarded conversations, the almost robotic adherence to protocol. It was a well-oiled machine, undeniably, but where was the heart? Where was the spark of innovation that came from genuine connection and shared purpose? He found a chilling efficiency of indifference, a culture where the invisible workforce blended seamlessly into the polished chrome and glass, their humanity as unnoticed as dust motes in the air conditioning. He documented dozens of instances where cross-departmental collaboration was stifled by bureaucratic red tape or personal rivalries, each missed opportunity a tiny, insidious drain on the company's potential. He spent hours in the company cafeteria, listening to fragmented conversations, piecing together the unspoken grievances and frustrations of employees from every level. Among the ranks of this invisible workforce was Marco Rodriguez, one of the night custodians. Ethan had observed Marco for weeks. He was a man in his late 40s, always present, always meticulous, moving through the cavernous hallways of the 50th floor with a quiet dignity. His cleaning cart, stocked with an array of industrial-strength polishes and sanitizers, was his constant companion. Marco's eyes, deep-set and weary, carried a burden Ethan couldn't quite decipher, a silent weight that seemed to press down on his shoulders even as he straightened a misplaced chair or wiped down a gleaming surface. Each morning, Marco would offer Ethan, or rather Ed Johnson, a polite, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of quiet acknowledgement, never initiating conversation, always just existing within the periphery. Ethan noted the meticulousness with which Marco arranged the waste bins, the careful way he dusted the delicate sculptures in the lobby, the almost reverent polish he applied to the CEO's door. It was the work of someone who cared deeply about his environment, even if he himself remained largely unseen. Ethan, in his undercover role, made a point of observing all employees, not just those in his assigned department. He spent late nights in the office pretending to work, but secretly watching the building come alive with the nocturnal rhythm of the cleaning staff. He saw the sweat on their brows, the tired slump of their shoulders, the quiet camaraderie they shared amongst themselves, a stark contrast to the often stiff interactions of the day staff. He noticed the pride Marco took in his work, the way he polished the brass to a mirror sheen, the systematic order he brought to the otherwise chaotic detritus of a busy workday. It was a silent ballet of diligence, performed nightly for an audience that rarely noticed. He even followed Marco on occasion, discreetly, watching him move through the 52nd floors of the building, a silent guardian of order in the chaos of corporate life. He wondered about Marco's life outside these walls, about the source of the profound weariness in his eyes. He assumed it was the common burden of physical labor, the endless cycle of demanding, often thankless work. He was a janitor, after all. What else was there to know? The corporate strategy department, where Ed Johnson was ostensibly employed, was a microcosm of Sterling Dynamics' perceived problems. Brilliant minds, often at odds, fiercely protective of their own projects, wary of collaboration. Ethan noted the resistance to new ideas that didn't originate from within their own teams, the polite but firm rejection of suggestions from junior analysts, the casual dismissal of anyone deemed below them. It was a constant battle for recognition, for budget, for influence. He saw the waste, not in terms of material, but in wasted human potential, in ideas that withered unspoken because the environment wasn't conducive to their growth. He observed a senior vice president, notorious for taking credit for others' work, subtly undermining a young, brilliant data scientist's presentation, effectively burying a potentially game-changing algorithm simply because it hadn't been his idea. These were the inefficiencies the board had tasked him with finding, and he was finding them in spades. He often found himself alone in his analyst cubicle long after others had left, sifting through reports, analyzing data, but mostly just observing. The hum of the air conditioning, the distant drone of city traffic, and the occasional creak of the building settling were his companions. It was during these late-night sessions that he often encountered Marco. Their interactions were brief, almost ritualistic. A nod, a murmured good morning or good evening, a shared moment of quiet in the vast empty halls. Ethan often felt a flicker of something, a strange connection to this man who was so utterly unlike anyone else in his corporate world. Marco was real, grounded, a stark counterpoint to the performative identities he encountered daily. He'd often wonder about the stories Marco's quiet eyes could tell, stories that would likely never be shared within the walls of Sterling Dynamics. Ethan also noted the subtle shifts in company policy that went unnoticed by most. A new directive about streamlining employee benefits for part-time and service staff, championed by a cost-cutting executive named Harrison Thorne, had been implemented quietly, almost stealthily. It was buried deep within an HR memo, disguised as an optimization strategy. Ethan, as Ed Johnson, had reviewed the policy, noting its potential impact, but dismissed it as a necessary evil of corporate efficiency. After all, the numbers looked good on paper. Lower overheads, increased profit margins, standard corporate practice. He had no reason to believe it would touch the lives of people like Marco in any significant way. The human cost, he rationalized, was an unfortunate but inevitable byproduct of maintaining a competitive edge. He'd even approved the policy himself, albeit under his true identity, without delving into its granular impact. The decision had been made in the sterile vacuum of a boardroom, far removed from the lives it would inevitably alter. He'd also begun to notice small, almost imperceptible changes in Marco, a slight tremor in his hand as he wiped down a desk, a deeper slump in his shoulders, a subtle pallor to his skin that suggested exhaustion, not just from work, but from something deeper. Ethan, ever the astute observer, filed these details away. He attributed them to the demanding nature of Marco's work, to the relentless pace of a night shift. He considered suggesting a review of cleaning staff hours, perhaps advocating for more ergonomic equipment, but it was a low priority on his list of corporate inefficiencies. He was looking for systemic flaws, not individual burdens. His focus remained on the grand strategy, the big picture, the mechanisms of profit and loss. The individual struggles of a janitor, he regretfully acknowledged to himself, felt too granular, too personal to fit into his corporate mandate. The tension within Sterling Dynamics, though rarely overt, was palpable. The pressure to perform, to innovate, to maintain the company's reputation as a financial powerhouse was immense. Ethan, as CEO, felt it acutely. As Ed Johnson, he saw how it trickled down, creating a climate of fear and competition where vulnerability was a weakness and personal struggles were best kept hidden. No one wanted to be perceived as anything less than fully capable, fully optimized. The corporate machine demanded perfection, and it had little room for human frailty. Employees guarded their secrets, their insecurities, their personal lives behind carefully constructed professional facades. He had spent weeks meticulously documenting these observations, compiling an exhaustive report that would, he hoped, revolutionize Sterling Dynamics from the inside out. He had identified bottlenecks in communication, redundancies in departments, and a distinct lack of cross-collaboration. He had even drafted proposals for new incentive structures, redesigned departmental hierarchies, and improved internal training programs. He felt confident, almost smug, in his ability to diagnose and cure the corporate malaise. He was a master strategist after all. He could fix anything, provided it could be quantified, analyzed, and placed within a framework of corporate logic. But he had missed something fundamental, something profoundly human that no spreadsheet or organizational chart could ever capture. He had been so focused on the visible mechanics of the company, on the numbers and the processes, that he had overlooked the invisible threads that truly held it together. The quiet dignity of a man like Marco, the silent sacrifices made by those who kept the lights on and the floors clean. He had been so busy looking for inefficiencies that he had become blind to humanity. His carefully constructed intellectual fortress, designed to solve corporate problems, had created a blind spot for human suffering. This particular Tuesday morning, an unseasonably warm day in late spring, he had planned to spend a few hours in his real office before slipping back into his Ed Johnson persona. He needed to review some confidential documents, prepare for an upcoming board meeting, and allow himself a moment of respite from the constant performance of his undercover role. He longed for the quiet solitude of his executive space, a temporary return to the man he truly was. He certainly hadn't expected to find a child there crying. The sight of Leo, small and broken amidst the grandeur of his office, was a stark awakening. It was not just a child crying, it was a symptom, a stark, undeniable manifestation of the very disconnect he was trying to understand. The torn uniform, the smudged dirt, the hidden bruise, these were not just superficial details. They were a raw, unfiltered message, a human cry piercing through the polished silence of his corporate empire. And as Ethan knelt there, looking into the raw blue eyes of Marco's son, the profound weariness in Marco's own eyes suddenly made a terrible, heartbreaking kind of sense. The truth in that moment was not just beginning to reveal itself, it was screaming, a sound that would echo through the pristine halls of Sterling Dynamics and forever change the man who heard it. "What's wrong?" Ethan's voice, usually a deep, resonant command, was now a gentle caress, barely above a whisper. He knelt fully, his eyes level with Leo's, trying to project a calm he didn't entirely feel. The boy flinched, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor running through his small frame, but he didn't pull away. Instead, his blue eyes, swimming with unshed tears, fixed on Ethan's face with a desperate, childlike vulnerability. He tried again to rub away the evidence of his anguish, but his small hands were clumsy, merely spreading the grime and moisture across his cheeks. My dad," Leo stammered, his voice choked with sobs. Each word seemed to be a monumental effort, pushing past a wall of grief and fear. He's sick. At home. He has a fever." A fresh wave of tears broke, cascading down his dirty cheeks, blurring the lines of his face. He sniffled, wiping his nose with the torn sleeve of his white shirt, leaving a fresh streak of dirt. The movement drew Ethan's attention again to the faint bruise peeking from beneath the tear, a bluish-purple discoloration against pale skin. Ethan's heart twisted. He remembered Marco's quiet dignity, his almost robotic presence, his unfailing routine. For Marco to miss work, he had to be truly unwell. "Sick," Ethan repeated softly, trying to keep his voice steady. "How sick, Leo?" "Very. He was so hot this morning, and he was coughing a lot." Leo's eyes, wide and filled with a terror that belied his 8 years, pleaded with Ethan for understanding, for help. Mommy used to get sick like that sometimes. Before—" He trailed off, the unspoken word hanging heavy in the air between them, a ghost in the gleaming corporate office. Ethan's mind raced. He knew from Marco's personnel file, accessed through an obscure, rarely used employee welfare database he'd stumbled upon during his undercover investigation into human capital allocation, that Marco was a widower. His wife, Isabella, had passed away 3 years prior. The raw pain in Leo's voice, the haunting connection to his mother's illness, pierced through Ethan's carefully constructed corporate shell. This wasn't just a sick father. This was a child reliving a past trauma, terrified of its repetition. "It's okay, Leo," Ethan murmured, his hand hovering, unsure whether to offer comfort or maintain the fragile boundary the boy seemed to need. "It's going to be okay. Your dad will get better." The words felt hollow, even to him. He didn't know that. He didn't know anything about Marco's medical history or the severity of his current condition. He was a CEO, not a doctor. But he was also a human being, and the sight of Leo's trembling lips and tear-filled eyes demanded an immediate, unequivocal response. But I had nowhere to go," Leo whispered, the confession a fresh source of shame. "Our neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, she watches me before school, but she went to her sister's house in Arizona. My dad said she'd be back next week, and he was too sick to call anyone else, so I came here. This is where he always is. I thought he'd be here." He gestured vaguely around the massive, empty office, its silence suddenly deafening. He had been sitting there since before dawn, a small, solitary sentinel in the heart of Sterling Dynamics, waiting for a father who never came. He'd tried to distract himself, opening the tattered book of classic American folk tales, its pages now damp from his tears. The irony was a bitter pill for Ethan to swallow. His private executive sanctuary, a place he meticulously guarded, had become a desperate refuge for a child of his most invisible employee. The Ed Johnson persona, designed to observe, to analyze, to remain detached, evaporated in the face of such profound, unadorned vulnerability. It demanded action, not analysis. "You've been here all morning?" Ethan asked, his voice laced with an incredulity that was more self-reproach than question. The boy nodded, rubbing his eyes again. "I tried to read," he mumbled, pointing to the open book, its delicate pages curled and damp. "My favorite stories, but I was scared." The full weight of the truth began to descend upon Ethan. It wasn't just Marco's absence, it was Leo's raw, unadulterated despair, the palpable fear of a child who had already experienced loss and was now facing the terrifying prospect of another. The corporate shell, built over years of calculated ambition, began to crack, revealing the human beneath. Ethan Hayes, the titan of industry, found himself utterly disarmed by an 8-year-old boy in a dirty uniform. Without revealing his true identity, for now he was still Ed Johnson, the kindly, if somewhat confused analyst. Ethan knew he couldn't leave Leo alone. He couldn't simply call security or HR. This was beyond policy. This was a human crisis unfolding in his private office. "Okay, Leo," he said, his voice gaining a new, firm resolve. "Your dad's sick, and you're scared. That's perfectly understandable. But you're not alone anymore. We'll figure this out together, okay?" Leo looked up, a flicker of hope, fragile but present, in his tear-soaked eyes. "Really?" he whispered, as if daring to believe. "Really?" Ethan confirmed, a small, genuine smile touching his lips. He rose slowly, offering Leo his hand. The boy hesitated for a moment, then placed his small, sticky hand in Ethan's much larger one. The warmth of Leo's hand was a jolt, a physical connection that grounded Ethan more profoundly than any handshake with a board member ever had. "First things first," Ethan said, gently pulling Leo to his feet. "Let's get you some breakfast. You must be starving." He led Leo out of his office, carefully locking the door behind them, a silent prayer that the other man who had been watching in the background hadn't registered the child's presence too deeply. They walked through the still quiet halls, the boy's small hand clinging to Ethan's, a lifeline in an unfamiliar world. Ethan steered them towards a small, unassuming diner a few blocks from Sterling Dynamics, a place he frequented as Ed Johnson, for its no-frills coffee and anonymous booths. He ordered Leo pancakes and bacon, watching as the boy devoured the food with an appetite born of hunger and emotional stress. As Leo ate, Ethan listened, patiently. The boy, fueled by pancakes and the unexpected kindness of a stranger, slowly began to recount fragments of his life. His mom, Isabella, a kind woman who loved to sing, how she'd gotten sick, a bad sickness that made her tired all the time. The doctors, the hospitals, the sadness. His dad, Marco, working extra hours, always tired but always there for him. The struggles to make ends meet, the precarious childcare arrangements, the endless juggle of a single father trying to keep his family afloat in a city that often felt indifferent. "Dad says he used to build buildings," Leo confided, his mouth full of pancake, his eyes momentarily losing their sadness as a spark of pride ignited. "Big, beautiful buildings. He showed me pictures. He was an architect." Ethan nearly choked on his coffee. "An architect?" Marco Rodriguez, the quiet, weary night custodian? The pieces began to click into place, unsettling the carefully ordered puzzle of Ethan's observations. After breakfast, Ethan couldn't just drop Leo off at school. The boy was too upset, too vulnerable, and the bruise on his arm, though faint, gnawed at Ethan. Instead, he brought Leo back to Sterling Dynamics, finding a vacant conference room on a lower floor, far from the executive suites. He gave Leo a whiteboard marker and let him doodle on the expansive glass board, filling it with fantastical beasts and sprawling landscapes, a vivid contrast to the corporate jargon that usually adorned its surface. While Leo drew, lost in his own world of imagination, Ethan retreated to a quiet corner, his mind buzzing with a newfound urgency. His undercover mission, initially a strategic maneuver to identify corporate inefficiencies, had taken a drastic, unforeseen turn. It was no longer about numbers and processes, it was about people, specifically about Marco and Leo. The Ed Johnson persona, designed for observation, now demanded action, real, impactful action. He excused himself briefly, claiming an urgent meeting, and made his way to a rarely used secure workstation in a remote corner of the building. He bypassed firewalls, exploited backdoors, and used his CEO credentials masked by an encrypted VPN to discreetly begin his own, unauthorized investigation into Marco Rodriguez. He accessed HR files, not as Ed Johnson, seeking data for a report, but as Ethan Hayes seeking the truth. He scoured old performance reviews, which were consistently glowing, praising Marco's dedication, reliability, and meticulousness. He tapped into the company's rarely used employee welfare records, a treasure trove of forgotten forms and bureaucratic notations. What he unearthed was a story of quiet resilience, but also of profound corporate oversight. Leo's innocent words had been a key. Marco wasn't just a janitor, he was indeed a trained architect. The files confirmed it. A Bachelor of Architecture degree from a reputable state university proudly displayed on an old, faded application form from 12 years ago. He had worked as a junior architect for a small firm in the suburbs for several years, building a promising portfolio. Then came the tragedy. 5 years ago, his wife, Isabella, had fallen ill with a rare, aggressive neurological condition. The medical bills had been crippling, devastating their meager savings and plunging them deep into debt. His architectural firm, unable to offer the kind of robust health insurance or flexible hours Marco needed to care for Isabella and their then 3-year-old son, had to let him go. Marco, a man of profound dignity and quiet determination, had taken the only job available that offered both comprehensive health insurance and flexible enough hours to manage Isabella's worsening condition and care for Leo, a night custodian at Sterling Dynamics. It was a stark, heartbreaking demotion, a brilliant mind relegated to polishing floors, all for the sake of his family. Ethan discovered that Marco had meticulously maintained his professional licenses, paying the annual fees with what little disposable income he had, nurturing a fragile hope that one day he might return to his true calling. He clung to the dream of designing buildings again, of seeing his vision take tangible form, but the reality of his daily life, the relentless grind of 2 jobs and single parenthood, had slowly eroded that hope. And then came the policy change, the one Ethan himself, in his role as CEO, had vaguely approved. The streamlining employee benefits for part-time and service staff, championed by Harrison Thorne, the cost-cutting executive. Ethan remembered the proposal landing on his desk, a neatly compiled spreadsheet detailing projected savings. He had skimmed the executive summary, saw the favorable numbers, and signed off, trusting his team to manage the details. He hadn't questioned the human cost, hadn't delved into the specifics. Now the specifics were screaming at him. The new policy had silently downgraded benefits for a significant portion of Sterling Dynamics' workforce, including all part-time and service staff like Marco. His already meager health insurance, which he relied on to manage chronic pain from an old construction injury, a legacy from his early days as an architect, overseeing a building site, had been severely curtailed. Even more devastating, it had impacted Leo's infrequent therapy sessions, initiated after Isabella's passing to help the boy cope with his grief. The previous plan covered a portion, the new one covered almost nothing. This reduction meant Marco was now working extra hours, often unpaid, at a second job cleaning offices in the suburbs, just to make ends meet. He was a ghost, moving from one gleaming corporate tower to another, sacrificing sleep, health, and what little time he had with his son, all to barely survive. The exhaustion was profound, leaving him vulnerable to illness, as today's high fever tragically proved. The 8-year-old Leo's bruised arm was not just a playground mishap, as Ethan had initially surmised. It was a consequence of an inadequate after-school program, the only one Marco could afford since his benefits were cut. The previous program, a nurturing environment with dedicated staff, had become prohibitively expensive. The new one was chaotic, overcrowded, and understaffed. Leo had been pushed by older kids and fell, a minor incident that Marco had been unable to address properly due to his overwhelming schedule, unable to even pick Leo up from school that day to check on him. The bruise, a silent testament to neglect, became a symbol of a larger, systemic failure. The full devastating weight of the truth descended upon Ethan Hayes. His company, his carefully managed empire, had unknowingly, or perhaps more accurately, indifferently, contributed to the silent suffering of one of its most dedicated, yet invisible employees. The inefficiencies he was tasked to find were not in spreadsheets, but in the dehumanizing policies, in the casual disregard for the human element that left people like Marco and Leo struggling just to survive. The corporate culture he had sought to analyze and optimize was in fact silently crushing the very lives it depended upon. The memory of Leo's tear-streaked face, the tattered uniform, the hidden bruise, the mention of his mother's illness, the dignity of an architect cleaning floors, it all crystallized into a searing indictment of his own leadership. He, Ethan Hayes, CEO, was responsible. He had signed off on the policies. He had built this empire on the backs of people like Marco, people he had never truly seen. The truth broke his heart, not just for Marco and Leo, but for the profound moral compromises he had allowed his corporation to make. His undercover mission, initially a strategic maneuver to identify abstract problems, had now become a profound personal reckoning. He had been so focused on the bottom line, on the grand vision, that he had utterly failed to see the human lives beneath the surface. The invisible workforce was no longer invisible. Its suffering was laid bare right in his private office, in the tears of a child. And Ethan knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that Sterling Dynamics could never be the same. Neither could he. The transformation had begun, fueled by a child's pain and a CEO's dawning, devastating realization. The afternoon sunlight slanted through the 55th floor windows of the Sterling Dynamics boardroom, illuminating dust motes, dancing in the air like forgotten dreams. The room, usually a bastion of polished pronouncements and assertive opinions, was hushed, almost reverent. Ethan Hayes stood at the head of the immense mahogany table, not in his Ed Johnson disguise, but in a sharp, dark suit that perfectly conveyed his power and his current, uncompromising resolve. His presence alone commanded attention, but today there was a new edge to him, a barely contained fury that thrummed beneath his calm demeanor. He began not with charts or market projections, but with an image projected onto the enormous screen behind him, a close-up of a tattered book. Classic American Folk Tales, the title read, its pages visibly damp and worn. The board members, accustomed to quarterly reports and financial metrics, exchanged puzzled glances. Harrison Thorne, the executive responsible for the benefit cuts, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, a faint frown creasing his brow. "This book," Ethan's voice cut through the silence, clear and steady, yet imbued with an intensity that made several board members lean forward, "belongs to an 8-year-old boy named Leo. He spent the early hours of this morning, alone and terrified, in my office. In this office." His gaze swept over the stunned faces, lingering for a fraction of a second on Thorne. His father, Marco Rodriguez, one of our night custodians, was too ill to bring him to school. Too ill and too overwhelmed to find an alternative, because the systems we put in place have systematically stripped him of his support network. A ripple of murmurs went through the room. Board members whispered amongst themselves, confusion battling with a dawning apprehension. Ethan paused, letting the information sink in, allowing the stark image of the child's book to etch itself onto their collective consciousness. He then advanced the slide. The next image was a scan of an expired architectural license, bearing Marco Rodriguez's name, proudly displaying a degree from a reputable state university. "Marco Rodriguez," Ethan continued, his voice now colder, sharper, "is not just a janitor, he is a trained architect. A man who once designed buildings, but who 5 years ago took a job with Sterling Dynamics, a job far beneath his qualifications, because his wife was dying, and he needed the health insurance we offered." The murmurs grew louder, more agitated. This was not the typical board meeting. This was not about quarterly earnings. This was raw, unexpected, intensely personal. Ethan didn't wait for questions. He launched into the meticulously compiled findings of his 6-week undercover operation, but this time, the narrative wasn't about abstract inefficiencies. It was about their human cost. He spoke of the chilling efficiency of indifference, the systematic dehumanization of the invisible workforce. He laid bare the cold, hard facts of Marco's life, the crippling medical debt from Isabella's illness, the struggle as a single father, the maintenance of his architectural licenses, a testament to a deferred dream. He spoke of the second, unpaid cleaning job Marco had to take to simply survive, the exhaustion, the vulnerability to illness. Then he paused. He looked directly at Harrison Thorne. "And then there's the recent policy change, championed by Mr. Thorne here," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion yet radiating a quiet menace. "The streamlining employee benefits for part-time and service staff. a policy I regrettably signed off on without fully understanding its devastating human impact. This policy, Ethan's voice rose slightly, cut Marco's already meager health insurance, impacting his own chronic pain management and, crucially, Leo's therapy sessions. It forced Marco into an impossible situation, leaving his son vulnerable to incidents like the one that left him with this. He projected a final image, a clear, magnified photo of the faint bruise on Leo's arm. The room fell into a stunned, horrified silence. The air crackled with tension. The weight of the revelations pressed down on every board member. They were accustomed to seeing numbers, not faces. They dealt in abstractions, not in the tangible pain of a child. Ethan's eyes, blazing with an unfamiliar fire, swept over the faces in the room. He saw shock, disbelief, and in some a flicker of genuine shame. "We talk about innovation," he said, his voice now resonating with conviction. "We talk about corporate social responsibility. But what kind of innovation can truly thrive in an environment where we fail to see, to value, the very people who lay the foundation of our success? What kind of responsibility do we uphold when our policies, in the name of cost-cutting, silently inflict suffering on the most vulnerable among us?" He took a deep breath, the silence in the room amplifying the gravity of his next words. "The inefficiencies I was tasked to find were not in spreadsheets. They were in the dehumanizing policies that left people like Marco and Leo struggling just to survive. The truth broke my heart, not just for them, but for the moral compromises I allowed this corporation to make." Then he dropped the bombshell. "My undercover mission was never about Ed Johnson finding problems. It was about Ethan Hayes discovering the truth." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air like a heavy shroud. "And the truth is, this company has lost its way. And I, as its CEO, bear the ultimate responsibility." Just as the board members began to process this shocking confession, the boardroom doors opened and a figure entered. It was Marco Rodriguez. He was pale, his movements stiff, clearly still battling his fever, but his shoulders were squared and his eyes held a quiet, weary dignity. He had been called in under false pretenses, told there was an urgent matter regarding his son's school records that only he could clarify. He didn't know he was walking into the crucible of Sterling Dynamics' reckoning. Ethan turned to face Marco, his expression softening, losing its corporate edge. "Marco," he said, his voice now gentle, yet clear enough to carry across the room, "thank you for coming. I know you're not well." Marco nodded, his eyes darting from Ethan to the assembled board members, sensing the unusual tension in the room. He looked at Ethan, then back at the screen where the image of his architectural license still glowed. A flicker of recognition, then confusion crossed his face. "Marco," Ethan continued, "you know me as Ed Johnson, but that's not my true identity. My name is Ethan Hayes. I am the CEO of Sterling Dynamics." The revelation hit Marco like a physical blow. His jaw tightened, his eyes widening in disbelief, then quickly narrowing with a quiet, dignified anger. The man who had been friendly, if somewhat awkward, the analyst who had shared late-night hallway greetings, was the very man who controlled his destiny, and by extension, Leo's. The full extent of the injustice, the deliberate subterfuge, the crushing weight of his silent struggles suddenly being laid bare before the very architects of those struggles, washed over him. He clenched his fists at his sides, his shoulders tensing, his face a mask of profound disillusionment. His body swayed slightly, a testament to his illness, but his gaze remained fixed, unwavering on Ethan. The silence in the boardroom was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. The board members watched, transfixed, as the CEO of Sterling Dynamics stood before his night custodian, stripped of all pretense, the full weight of his corporate empire suddenly feeling insignificant in the face of this raw, human confrontation. Ethan, without hesitation, moved swiftly. He began to outline a series of immediate, drastic changes. "Effective immediately," he announced, his voice resonating with unwavering authority. "All original benefits for service staff, including comprehensive health insurance, childcare subsidies, and educational support, are not only reinstated but significantly enhanced. We will implement a new, generous paid time-off policy for all hourly employees, ensuring no one ever has to choose between their health and their livelihood again." He turned back to Marco, his eyes filled with a blend of humility and profound respect. Marco, your architectural expertise is a profound asset that this company has overlooked. I'm offering you a newly created position as the head of facilities design and renovation. This role will leverage your skills to improve employee well-being across all our offices, designing spaces that foster collaboration, comfort, and human dignity. Your salary will be commensurate with your extraordinary talents, not your past title. Marco's expression was unreadable. The anger was still there, but it was now laced with a flicker of astonishment, a hesitant spark of hope he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He looked at Ethan, then at the image of his expired license, a ghost of a life he thought was lost forever. Furthermore, Ethan continued, addressing the entire room, to honor the spirit of resilience and the profound love of a mother, we will establish a substantial scholarship fund for the children of all Sterling Dynamics employees, from executive to service staff. This fund, dedicated to educational and therapeutic support, will be named the Isabella Rodriguez Memorial Fund, in honor of Leo's late mother, ensuring that no child at Sterling Dynamics will ever again cry alone in an empty office because their family could not afford care or opportunity. Harrison Thorne, the cost-cutting executive, finally found his voice, a strangled protest. Ethan, this is unprecedented. The financial implications... Ethan cut him off, his gaze like steel. Mr. Thorne, your priorities have demonstrated a profound misalignment with the values this company will now uphold. Your position at Sterling Dynamics is terminated, effective immediately. Please gather your belongings and vacate the premises. Thorne, stunned, flushed crimson, but the unwavering resolve in Ethan's eyes left no room for argument. He rose, his face a mask of indignant shock, and stumbled out of the room, leaving behind an echoing silence. Ethan then turned his attention back to the bewildered board members. This is not merely a corporate overhaul, he stated, his voice ringing with a newfound conviction. This is a human transformation. We will foster a culture where every employee, from the CEO to the newest janitor, is seen, valued, and respected, where their humanity is not an inefficiency, but our greatest asset. He concluded by revealing his final act of accountability. A company-wide town hall would be held that afternoon. He would stand before all Sterling Dynamics employees, not as an untouchable CEO, but as a leader who admitted his failings, apologized for the systemic indifference, and committed to a new path. The board members, initially shocked into silence, now began to stir. Some looked uneasy, others appeared genuinely moved. A few, particularly those with younger children or personal experiences with illness, had tears in their eyes. The moral weight of the situation, so starkly presented, had broken through their corporate armor. Later that day, Marco Rodriguez, his fever now subsiding, stood in the packed auditorium of Sterling Dynamics, a sea of faces before him. By his side, holding his hand, was Leo. The boy, his uniform now clean, his blonde hair neatly combed, looked up at his father, then at Ethan Hayes, who stood beside them. The tears were gone. In their place, a faint but genuine smile touched his lips. Ethan, dressed simply in a business-casual shirt, stood at the podium. He didn't mince words. He spoke of his undercover mission, of the systemic flaws he discovered, and of his profound regret for the policies he had championed. He spoke of Leo, of Marco, of Isabella, of the invisible suffering that had been allowed to fester within the heart of his empire. He spoke of how the tears of a child, alone in his office, had shattered his complacency and broken his heart. He looked directly at Marco, who stood with quiet strength, his hand still clasped by his son's. "Marco," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion, "I am profoundly sorry for what our company and I have put you and your son through. It is my deepest honor to offer you this new role and to work with you to rebuild Sterling Dynamics into a company that truly values every single human being who walks through its doors." Marco, after a moment of profound silence, a lifetime of suppressed dreams and unspoken pain reflected in his eyes, simply nodded. He looked down at Leo, who squeezed his hand, then back at Ethan, a silent acknowledgement of the new beginning. His dignity, battered but never broken, was fully restored. The applause that erupted was not the polite, obligatory clap of corporate meetings. It was a roar, a surge of emotion from an employee base that had for too long felt unseen. It was a standing ovation, not just for Ethan, but for Marco, for Leo, for the dawning of a new era. The transformation had truly begun. It wasn't just a corporate overhaul, it was a human awakening, ignited by a child's tears and a CEO's broken heart, proving that true leadership meant seeing beyond the bottom line and into the lives of the people who built the empire. The days that followed the town hall meeting were a whirlwind of activity, a frantic, exhilarating scramble to dismantle the old and build the new. Ethan Hayes, no longer hidden behind the guise of Ed Johnson, moved through the halls of Sterling Dynamics with a renewed sense of purpose. His focus laser-sharp, his energy boundless. The polite indifference that had once permeated the corporate atmosphere was replaced by a vibrant hum of collaboration and cautious optimism. Employees, invigorated by Ethan's public apology and the immediate, tangible changes, began to shed their guarded professionalism, allowing glimpses of their true selves to emerge. The sense of collective responsibility, once a hollow corporate slogan, now felt real, palpable. Ethan's first priority was to personally ensure Marco Rodriguez's smooth transition into his new role as head of facilities design and renovation. He spent hours with Marco in his new spacious office, a sharp contrast to the cleaning closet he had once utilized, discussing his vision. Marco, initially hesitant, slowly began to open up, his architectural mind, long dormant, sparking with brilliant ideas. He proposed innovative designs for employee break rooms, envisioning spaces flooded with natural light and comfortable seating, not just utilitarian corners. He spoke of acoustic paneling to reduce stress in open-plan offices, of ergonomic furniture that genuinely supported well-being, of integrating green spaces and natural elements into the urban concrete jungle. His plans were not merely about aesthetics. They were deeply rooted in a philosophy of human dignity and psychological comfort, a direct reflection of his own past struggles. "Imagine, Ethan," Marco had said, a newfound light in his weary eyes, "a place where even the smallest details of the environment tell you that you are valued. That is what I want to create." Ethan listened, captivated. He realized that Marco, far from being just an architect, was a visionary. His insights, honed by years of observing the overlooked details of corporate spaces from the perspective of an invisible worker, were invaluable. He saw not just structures, but the human experience within them. Ethan immediately approved a substantial budget for Marco's initial projects, giving him carte blanche to transform the working environment, starting with the 50th floor, the very space where Leo had cried. The Isabella Rodriguez Memorial Fund was also established with astonishing speed. Ethan personally oversaw the allocation of a significant seed fund, and within days, pledges from other board members, genuinely moved by the story, began to pour in. The fund was designed to cover not only educational scholarships for employees' children, but also provide mental health and wellness support, recognizing the silent battles many families fought. Leo was among the first beneficiaries. His therapy sessions reinstated and expanded, giving him a safe space to process his grief and fears. Ethan, however, wasn't just fixing structural problems. He was addressing the cultural rot he had discovered during his undercover stint. He initiated weekly open-door sessions, not just with executives, but with employees from every department, every level. He listened to grievances, suggestions, and personal stories, creating a platform for dialogue that had never existed before. He dismantled bureaucratic red tape, empowering managers to make decisions that benefited their teams rather than stifling them with endless approvals. The senior vice president, who had undermined the young data scientist, was replaced by the data scientist herself, a bold move that signaled a fundamental shift in the company's meritocracy. Harrison Thorne's dismissal had sent shockwaves through the executive ranks. It was a clear, unambiguous message. The era of valuing profit over people was over. Some executives, resistant to the new, more empathetic leadership, quietly resigned. Others, inspired by Ethan's drastic actions, found a renewed sense of purpose, embracing the challenge of building a truly human-centric corporation. The corporate landscape, once a cold and competitive battlefield, slowly began to thaw. One afternoon, a week after the town hall, Ethan found himself walking through the redesigned cafeteria, a space now adorned with living plants and softer lighting, the stark utilitarian tables replaced with more inviting seating arrangements. He saw employees laughing, sharing stories, their faces more relaxed, their conversations more animated. He felt a profound sense of satisfaction, a feeling far more fulfilling than any financial victory had ever given him. As he walked, he noticed a familiar figure, Leo. The boy, his uniform crisp and clean, sat at a table with another child, both engrossed in a board game. Leo looked up, caught Ethan's eye, and offered a shy, genuine smile, a world away from the tear-streaked face Ethan had first encountered. The faint bruise on his arm had faded, a physical reminder of a painful past that was now actively being healed. Marco, stepping out of a meeting with the head of human resources, approached Ethan. "Leo is doing so well," he said, his voice softer, lighter than Ethan had ever heard it. "His therapist says he's much more open, much happier. He even wants to try out for the school play." A proud smile lit Marco's face, erasing years of weariness. "That's wonderful, Marco," Ethan replied, genuinely pleased. "And how are you feeling? The fever fully gone?" "Yes, Ethan. Thank you. And this new work, it's like breathing again." Marco's gaze drifted around the transformed cafeteria. "I finally feel like I'm using my brain, my heart, for something meaningful. Not just cleaning up after others, but creating a better space for others." His eyes met Ethan's, filled with a deep, quiet gratitude that needed no words. Despite the positive changes, Ethan knew this was just the beginning. The scars of past indifference ran deep, and rebuilding trust, fostering a truly inclusive culture, would be a continuous effort. He understood that true leadership wasn't about a single grand gesture, but a sustained commitment to empathy, transparency, and accountability. He was constantly reminding himself and his team that the transformation was an ongoing journey, not a destination. He made a point of visiting Marco's architectural projects regularly, offering encouragement and support. He saw Marco, once a quiet shadow, now confidently leading teams, presenting his designs, his voice strong and clear. He witnessed the respect and admiration Marco garnered from his colleagues, who recognized his talent and unique perspective. The irony wasn't lost on Ethan. The solutions to Sterling Dynamics' problems weren't in the executive suites. They were often hidden in plain sight among the invisible workforce. Ethan also began to examine other aspects of the company's operations through a newly awakened lens. He scrutinized supply chain practices, ensuring fair labor standards. He reviewed investment portfolios, pushing for more ethical and sustainable options. His transformation, spurred by Leo's tears, wasn't confined to internal policies. It extended to every facet of Sterling Dynamics' impact on the world. He became a different kind of CEO, one driven not solely by profit, but by a profound sense of social responsibility. One evening, weeks later, Ethan found himself working late in his office. He wasn't reviewing reports, but rather a design schematic Marco had left on his desk for a new employee wellness center. It was brilliant, incorporating natural light, calming colors, and innovative spaces for meditation and exercise. As he admired the intricate details, he heard a soft knock on his door. It was Marco. He looked less weary now, his steps lighter. "Ethan," he said, a small smile playing on his lips, "just wanted to see if you had any thoughts on the wellness center plans. How come I brought you something?" He held out a framed photograph. It was an old, slightly faded picture of a young Marco, beaming, standing proudly beside Isabella, both looking vibrant and full of life. In the background, a building was under construction, a steel skeleton against a bright blue sky. "This was the first building I ever designed," Marco explained, his voice thick with emotion. Isabella was so proud. Ethan took the photograph, his gaze drawn to Isabella's radiant smile. He understood then the full depth of Marco's sacrifice, the dreams he had put aside for love and family. "Thank you, Marco," he said, his voice hoarse with unexpected emotion. "It's beautiful." She was beautiful. Marco nodded, his eyes glistening. "She would have loved what you're doing for this company, Ethan. For everyone." He paused, then added, "And she would have loved Leo's new school play. He got the lead role. He's going to be a brave knight." A wave of warmth spread through Ethan. The brave knight, no longer crying alone, but standing tall, full of youthful hope. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," Ethan promised. Marco smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached his eyes. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Marco," Ethan replied, clutching the photograph. He watched Marco walk away, no longer a silent shadow, but a man with purpose, dignity, and a future. As he looked at Isabella's smiling face in the photograph, Then at Marco's elegant architectural plans, he knew the transformation was real, profound, and deeply personal. It had begun with the shattering sight of a child's tears in his office, a moment that had broken his heart, but in doing so had opened it to a level of humanity he never knew he possessed. The empire of Sterling Dynamics was not just being rebuilt, it was being reborn, one human connection at a time. The numbers would still matter, yes, but never again at the expense of the people who generated them. The invisible had become visible, and in seeing them, Ethan Hayes had finally, truly seen himself. The day of Leo's school play dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil that had consumed Ethan just weeks prior. He arrived early, taking a seat in the third row of the bustling school auditorium, a place far removed from the hushed solemnity of corporate boardrooms. The air was thick with the scent of popcorn and nervous excitement, a palpable energy that reminded him of a simpler, more innocent world. He saw Marco, looking proud and a little overwhelmed, taking photos from the aisle. Leo, a vision of youthful exuberance, was backstage, preparing for his moment in the spotlight. When the curtains finally parted, revealing a makeshift castle backdrop and a collection of children dressed as knights and villagers, Ethan felt a swell of warmth in his chest. And there, center stage, a tiny figure in shining foil-covered armor, stood Leo. His voice, clear and strong, resonated through the auditorium as he delivered his lines about courage and defending the innocent. Ethan watched, captivated, a profound sense of pride bubbling within him. This was the boy who had cried alone and terrified in his office. Now he was a brave knight, embodying the very resilience his father possessed. After the play, Ethan congratulated Leo, shaking his tiny gloved hand. Leo, beaming, clutched a plastic sword. Marco, his eyes shining with paternal pride, embraced his son. The scene was a snapshot of a life rebuilt, a future reimagined. In the months that followed, the changes at Sterling Dynamics were not just superficial. They permeated the very fabric of the organization. The Isabella Rodriguez Memorial Fund became a beacon of hope, providing scholarships for dozens of children, enabling them to pursue their dreams, just as Isabella would have wished for Leo. The Wellness Center, designed with Marco's meticulous vision, opened to rave reviews, becoming a hub of activity where employees could de-stress, connect, and thrive. Marco's innovative designs extended beyond the main office, transforming satellite branches and remote workspaces into environments that genuinely supported the people within them. His work earned him national recognition in architectural design for corporate spaces, a testament to a talent almost lost to indifference. Ethan, for his part, continued his open-door policy, fostering a culture of active listening and empathetic leadership. He walked the floors of Sterling Dynamics daily, not as a CEO observing, but as a leader connecting, engaging, seeing every employee. He knew their names, their stories, their struggles. The vast chasm that had once existed between the executive suites and the service staff had narrowed, replaced by bridges of mutual respect and understanding. One particular example resonated deeply throughout the company. A young single mother, struggling with chronic fatigue and the demands of two jobs, confided in Ethan during an open-door session. Her condition was impacting her performance, and she feared losing her job. Ethan, recalling Marco's struggles, didn't hesitate. He immediately connected her with the new wellness program, ensured her access to top-tier medical care through the enhanced benefits, and arranged for flexible working hours that allowed her to rest and recover without fear of reprisal. Her subsequent recovery and renewed dedication to her work became a powerful symbol of the company's new ethos. It wasn't just about what you produced, it was about who you were and the support you needed to thrive. The board, initially wary of the financial implications of Ethan's drastic overhaul, soon began to see the tangible benefits. Employee turnover plummeted, absenteeism decreased, and most surprisingly, innovation surged. When employees felt valued, when their well-being was prioritized, they were more engaged, more creative, more loyal. Sterling Dynamics, once a titan resting on its laurels, now buzzed with a vibrant energy, reclaiming its position as an industry leader, not just in finance but in corporate culture. The numbers ironically followed suit. Profits, after an initial dip, began a steady, impressive climb, proving that humanity and profitability were not mutually exclusive but deeply interconnected. Ethan often reflected on the profound shift within himself. The ruthless, detached CEO he had once been felt like a distant memory. He still possessed his sharp intellect and strategic mind, but they were now tempered by an empathy he hadn't known he was capable of. The transformation, initiated by Leo's tears, had reshaped his entire worldview, turning a corporate mission into a personal crusade for human dignity. He learned to delegate not out of aloofness, but out of trust and empowerment. He sought advice from unexpected sources, from the frontline staff to the most junior analysts, understanding that perspective was paramount. He found joy in the small victories, a cleaner smile, a confident presentation from a once shy intern, the sound of laughter echoing through the redesigned break rooms. Marco and Ethan developed a unique and powerful friendship, a bond forged in shared experience and mutual respect. They often had lunch together, sometimes joined by Leo, whose presence served as a constant reminder of the catalyst for change. Marco would share his latest design ideas, and Ethan would offer strategic feedback, but their conversations often drifted to deeper topics: life, family, purpose. Marco, now an integral part of the executive team, often acted as Ethan's quiet conscience, a grounded voice reminding him of the human element in every decision. One particularly poignant moment occurred during a quarterly all-hands meeting. Ethan was presenting the company's strong performance, highlighting the success of the new cultural initiatives. He spoke of the Isabella Rodriguez Memorial Fund, of Marco's transformative work, of the renewed spirit of Sterling Dynamics. As he spoke, he saw Marco in the audience sitting beside Leo, who was now a confident, bright-eyed boy. Marco caught Ethan's eye, and a silent understanding passed between them, a nod that acknowledged the long, arduous journey and the profound, beautiful destination they had reached. Ethan concluded his presentation with a powerful message. We built Sterling Dynamics on the belief in progress, in innovation, in financial excellence, but we forgot one crucial element: that true progress is measured not just in profits, but in people. That true innovation comes from a culture of care, and that true excellence is achieved when every single individual, from the CEO to the newest employee, feels seen, valued, and empowered. The auditorium erupted in thunderous applause, a testament to the new Sterling Dynamics. The final act of Ethan's personal journey was subtle but significant. He donated his old Ed Johnson baseball cap to the company's new Museum of Transformation, a small exhibit dedicated to the company's cultural shift. It sat alongside Marco's expired architectural license, a poignant reminder of where they had come from and the profound lesson learned. He kept the framed photograph of Isabella and Marco on his desk, a daily inspiration, a constant reminder that beyond the gleaming towers and the bottom lines lay the invaluable currency of human lives. Leo, a few years older, now loved visiting his dad at work. He would sometimes wander into Ethan's office, no longer with tears but with a cheerful greeting and a new drawing to share. He saw Ethan not as the formidable CEO, but as a kind friend, the man who had helped his father, the man who had shown him that even in big, scary buildings there could be kindness and hope. The experience had transformed Ethan Hayes from a corporate titan into a compassionate leader, a man who understood that true power lay not in control, but in empathy. He had learned that the heart of a corporation wasn't in its balance sheets but in the collective humanity of its people, and he had learned that sometimes the truth that breaks your heart is exactly the truth you need to set you free, allowing you to build something far more profound and enduring than any empire of chrome and glass. The tale of the undercover CEO and the janitor's son became a legend within Sterling Dynamics, a cautionary tale and an inspiring one, whispered in the hallways and shared in hushed tones. It was a story about seeing the invisible, about the devastating impact of indifference, and the transformative power of a single heartfelt connection. It was a testament to the idea that beneath every professional facade there is a human story, and it is in those stories that the true strength of any organization, and indeed any society, truly lies. Ethan Hayes had found his mission, not in the pursuit of profit, but in the relentless pursuit of human dignity, one life at a time. His heart, once broken, had been rebuilt, stronger and more compassionate than ever before. And so, the legacy of a child's tears and a CEO's broken heart continued to echo through the halls of Sterling Dynamics, a living reminder that the greatest empires are not built with steel and glass, but with empathy, understanding, and the unwavering belief in the immeasurable value of every human soul. It was a transformation that began in sorrow, but bloomed into a vibrant, enduring hope. Every family has its silent battles, its untold stories. Every individual harbors a unique resilience, often hidden beneath layers of circumstance. This story reminds us that true strength is found not just in overcoming adversity, but in recognizing and supporting the strength in others. It's a testament to the power of human connection, the kind that breaks through indifference and inspires monumental change. If this narrative resonated with you, if it sparked a flicker of hope or a renewed sense of purpose, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that reveal the profound depth of the human spirit. Remember, even the smallest act of kindness can transform a life, and sometimes a single tear can shatter an entire world, paving the way for a better one.